Hey everyone, I've had a migraine for 2 days, so let's record a podcast. Hey, finally have intro music. I actually haven't picked it out yet, but that's gonna happen after I record this. Time for another world building. This actually got quite a few questions from a couple people, so apparently it's not a terrible idea to do this. Hopefully more questions come in, because I actually kind of like doing this. As for what's been up with things, the next part of Hunted is completely recorded, and I'm currently working on 2 pages of Dead, so those will both be, hopefully, coming out eventually. Outside of that, yeah, there's not much else happening. I'm working on some other stuff for side things, but that'll happen later. Anyway, let's get on to the questions. The first 7 are from Seiji, and the last 2 are from Amanda. 1. Are there any religions left, and what will they be like? Will we meet believers? Yes, there are plenty of religions left. Like, it's only been 300 years, and people have fairly stuck to the old world traditions and stuff in a lot of areas. And I mean, there are plenty of new religions that are sprouted up. There's rain worshippers, there's just tons of like apocalypse people and stuff like that, and weird like cults and stuff like that. And then there's also like just on the ships, like a religion spread from ship to ship pretty much, and they believe in something called the Mist Mother, and that will actually play a huge part later on. But right now, pretty much, we know that there is a prayer that they say before they fly out, and the Mist Mother is essentially their protector in the world when they go flying and stuff. And the Mist Mother may or may not actually be real, so we'll see more about that. But yeah, I mean, religion is all over, and we'll definitely meet people, and we might meet people in the next part. So we'll see about that. Your characters have flaws. Which flaws are your favorite ones? Pick any 6 or more. Jesus. Thanks, Seiji. Love you too. 6 flaws or more as my favorites. I guess Grace is super naive, and I really love that about her, because she knows literally nothing about the world. Like, she knows zero, and she tries to learn, and she tries to act like she does, but she really doesn't know anything. Fiona is very, very, very set in what she does. Silas kind of just is passive about everything. Quinn is very timid, and I don't know, John is he's something. God, there's gonna be so much more with John coming up, and I can't talk about any of it, because everything I talk about with John is spoilers. So I can't tell anything about that. I can't pick 6. I like everybody's flaws because it gives them something to them. It gives them more than just being a flat, blah, 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 blah. So, yeah. 3. Will we see more of the city ships involving into groundside matters? I am not going to draw a city ship. I am not good at architectural drawing, so no, I'm not good at drawing it anyway. Yes, the city ships are going to be heavily involved eventually. They are heavily involved in some aspects already, and they will be very, very, very heavily involved, like to the point that we probably won't see any of the ground side stuff for a very long time once they become involved. I haven't planned out everything in Hunted, like, at all, but I do know how they will be involved, and we'll see Bookkeeper and everybody else from Left Brig, and we'll see all the other ships that are still flying eventually come into play. What are your characters' dream of? Pick any 3 or more. Quinn just wants to be healthy. Fiona she dreams of revenge a lot. Like, that's her main goal, is revenge for some stuff that happened. And I don't know. Grace just wants to fly. That's it. Yes, I do listen. The next question is: do you listen to music when you write? And if yes, give us an example of song versus a scene. I do listen to music. I actually listen to a lot of podcasts when I write, but I do also listen to music. And I made a playlist on YouTube that I will link down in the show notes / description of this. And it, thanks, Train. Thanks. Hi to you too. Yeah, it's full of different things. Like, Paper Boats from the Transistor soundtrack is very set up for some of the more somber scenes. Things like Vault 101 by Kirby Crackle. If you hadn't noticed, I'm like not even shy about saying the airships are very much like Vault-Tec's vaults. They're experiments, and each one had its own, I wouldn't say unique, they all had like things in common, but each one had its own quirk to them. So, yeah, I've never made that any kind of thing but saying, yeah, no, they're essentially flying vaults in some ways. They were there to save people from the apocalypse, and the entity that made them decided to use them as experiments as well. So those are heavily inspired by that. So I listen to like Kirby Crackle and stuff when I do that. I listen to for fight scenes and stuff, which there's going to be one coming up. I listen to like there's a song by Silver Sun Pickups called Royal We, which actually has been a super inspirational song for a few things. And stuff like that, like a Gunslinger by Avenged Sevenfold and stuff like that. So yeah, there are plenty of points. How will different shifting seasons show in the story? Do different seasons affect the city ships at all? Second half of that, no. They fly above clouds and everything. I mean, also, there's a thing that hasn't been explored in Grace in that she can breathe much better than everybody else, because she grew up in such a low oxygen environment, so that's going to be explored later. But no, seasons don't typically do much to the city ships, because they're high above all that. They usually typically only sink down into the clouds to refuel. But as for different shifting seasons, there really aren't any anymore. The climate has been just fucked. It's pretty much just rain and mag storms and stuff all the time. Yeah, that's pretty much all that happens now. So, I mean, there's probably going to be, I mean, there's a rainy season, and then there's like the non-rainy season, but it's like Washington, where, I guess actually, I live here now, so it's not nearly as bad as I'd heard, but you know how you always hear that Washington gets like 300 days of rain a year? Well, that's not true. I wish it would fucking rain that much. But it's like that, where there's seasons where it rains worse, but that's about all. It's just always drizzling and gross out, so. Have you thought about the funeral process in your world? What about other ceremonial happenings like weddings or comings of age? Tell us about traditional flavors and of their importance. Funerals exist in small pockets where, like, it's still of religious importance, but in terms of, like, a societal thing, your body's typically just chucked off into the nearest place that they can dump it. Like, having graves in this world where things are constantly wet and digging them up, like digging a grave, is really hard because machinery is hard to move around on wet ground, and digging into the ground is just a pain in the ass, and typically your body's just either incinerated or thrown out somewhere where nobody will find it for long enough to where it'll get picked apart by animals or something, unless there is religious reasons where it needs to be buried or burned. So that will come into play. I don't know if it will come into play, but that comes into play for that kind of thing. As for weddings and comings of age, weddings may still happen in some of the larger places, but a lot of the time it's like, hey, you want to stay together? Yeah, we'll stay together. Okay. And coming of age is, it's just a thing. Like, as soon as you're able to work, you go do your shit. So, I mean, it's a fucked up place, and most of the time people don't live very, very long anyway, so not many people worry about that kind of stuff. Tradition is kept in some ways and definitely not in others. Like, manufacturing is very, very, very still traditional. I actually have I've been thinking about how manufacturing and like medicine still exists. Cars and machinery still exists. Like, these things still exist in this world. It's been 300 years. These things shouldn't still exist, but there are ways that they still do. There are still buildings around. There's still machinery and people that have learned how to use them. So those kind of traditional things have stayed. But in terms of like birthday parties or like laws for, oh, well, you can't drink until you're 21 and stuff, like, it's like nobody cares. That kind of stuff has been thrown out the window just because 21 is fairly old sometimes in some areas. Like, if you're a tribal or something, or you're one of the nomads and you're living out in the middle of nowhere and you're constantly fighting with other tribes and stuff for food and space, and just because they're raiding each other for supplies, like, you might not make it till 15 at that point. So the world is very different in terms of that. But coming of age stuff may come into play with certain tribes, and definitely in larger cities like Metro and Denver and stuff like that. Stuff will still come into play there, because those are still more almost old world places. They're very, like, especially Denver. I mean, it didn't really get touched much at all in the floods, because other than a lot of rain, it didn't really have any worry about the water getting up to them. So a lot of the stuff just stayed as it was, and it's kind of locked in time there, except with a lot more people than it should have, and a lot more manufacturing. So yeah, I mean, we'll see stuff like that, but they're not super important. I don't know. Yeah, that kind of stuff isn't super important to people when they're too busy trying not to die. And Amanda asks, what do I do to keep motivated? Fuck. I don't. I mean, if you hadn't noticed, like, shit takes me months to get out, and that's partially because I'm busy, partially because I'm trying to do too many things at once, and partially just because some days I will sit down to write or draw or storyboard or something, and I will just stare at it for an hour and then give up, and I will come back to it a week later. Like, I'm sure I could have gotten this part for Hunted written, the next part. I mean, I had 2/3 of it written for a month, and then I just didn't write anything else until last night, and I finally finished what I think will be enough to do it. But some days I can't. Some days I feel really motivated to do stuff. Some days I really don't, and I can't really force myself to, or else I turn out really shitty things. So, I don't know. Yeah, I can't really answer that one because I don't keep myself motivated. What do you do to help? What do you do to help come up with ideas for your work? Listen to music, listen to other stories, read other things, play video games. Like, video games are a massive source of inspiration for me. Probably the biggest part. Like, things like Rage and Fallout and like anything post-apocalyptic is a huge thing to me. But things like even Skyrim there is going to be bits of stuff from like Skyrim in there, and like all these different games and stuff that really influence the way I think about things. Yeah, like Warframe even has a bit of a thing in there, and Final Fantasy definitely. Like the hunters were inspired by the judges from Final Fantasy 12. I mean, they're definitely not the same function or anything, but the concept of them came from me thinking about the concept of those judges, the 12 judges from FF12 that were really cool to me and stuff, and then I came up slowly with that. I mean, that's how far back those fucking things go. But yeah, there's a bunch of different stuff, and anime helps, like watching different animes and stuff I really get ideas from, and all my stuff is like a big amalgamation of a bunch of other shit, and then also just random shit I worked on. Yeah, so I think that's about it for this week. This episode went a little bit longer than last time. Weird. Yeah, so if you have any questions, just toss them in the Reddit or on Twitter or Tumblr. Links will be down in the description. I'm recurring these on everything, so it's not hard to find me. Outside of that, yeah, I'll see you guys next Friday. Have a nice night.